In 2014, the United States Navy signed a contract to sell one of its aircraft carriers. Not a small one, a supercarrier longer than 3 football fields that once carried thousands of sailors and decades of history. A scrapping company in Texas was the buyer, and the agreed price for the entire warship was 1 cent, 1 penny, for a ship that, in its day, cost the modern equivalent of billions of dollars to build. And here is the part that should stop you. Even at that price, it was a hard sell. This was not a bidding war. Nobody was fighting to own a retired carrier. Instead, the Navy was, in effect, trying to give the thing away, and the single cent on the contract was the closest thing to zero the law would allow. Ships like the USS Forrestal and the USS Saratoga went out this way, for a penny each. A whole generation of Cold War carriers, gone for pocket change. By the end of this video, you will understand how a machine that cost a fortune and defended a nation becomes worth less than nothing, why the penny is not really a price at all, and why the person who takes that carrier off the Navy's hands is not getting a bargain. He is accepting a very expensive problem. The penny is a legal fiction. Start with the cent itself, because it is not what it looks like. That 1 cent is not the Navy's estimate of the ship's worth. It is a legal formality. For a contract to be binding, something of value has to change hands in both directions. Lawyers call it consideration. If the Navy handed the carrier over for nothing, the deal would be shakier in law. So the buyer pays a token, 1 cent, and the contract becomes real. And the penny exists to make the paperwork valid, nothing more. So forget the cent as a price. What is actually being transferred here is not value flowing from the Navy to the buyer. It is a burden flowing the other way. A Navy is paying, in the form of this whole arrangement, to make an enormous, expensive, hazardous object stop being its responsibility. And the scrapper is being handed a job and the ship, and a chance to make money on what is inside it. That cent is just the handshake. Negative value. Now the real question. How does a warship become worth less than nothing? A decommissioned carrier is not a sleeping asset. It is a running cost. While it waits in a mothball fleet, tied up at a pier in a place like Bremerton or Philadelphia, it costs money every single year to keep afloat, to monitor, to maintain enough that it does not become a hazard or sink at its own dock. It earns nothing and it drains money continuously, just sitting there. Every year the Navy holds it, the ship costs more. It is the opposite of an asset. It is a bill that floats. Then there is the disposal itself, which is expensive and dangerous. A ship built in the mid-20th century is full of things the modern world treats as toxic. Asbestos throughout the insulation, PCBs in the wiring and gaskets, lead paint, fuel and oil residues soaked into the structure. Taking one of these ships apart safely means removing and disposing of all of that under strict environmental rules, and that costs a fortune. Steel has value. Getting to the steel, legally and safely, costs more than most people imagine. You are not paying to own metal. You are paying to safely unbury it. Add it up. A thing that costs money to store, costs money to maintain, and costs a fortune to take apart safely, whose only real value is the scrap buried inside a mountain of hazardous material. To the Navy, the honest number on that ship is not a positive one. It is deeply negative. That carrier is worth less than nothing, and the penny sale is how the Navy escapes the bill. The scrapper's math. So why would anyone take it? Because a scrapper does a different sum, and if the numbers break right, there is money in the wreck. A supercarrier is tens of thousands of tons of steel. Inside it are also the valuable non-ferrous metals. Copper wiring by the mile, brass, bronze, aluminum, all worth far more per ton than steel. A scrapper's whole business is pulling all of that out and selling it. Against that recovered metal income, he sets his costs. First, the towing of the ship to his yard, months, sometimes years, of labor cutting it apart. Then the careful removal and disposal of all that asbestos and PCB and toxic residue. Cranes, equipment, permits, insurance. If the metal he pulls out is worth more than everything it costs him to get it, he profits. If not, he loses. That is the entire gamble he accepts for his 1 cent. Win the bet, and a dead warship becomes a mountain of sellable metal. Lose it, and you own a hazardous demolition project you cannot escape. He is not buying a ship. He is buying the right to spend a fortune dismantling it. betting that what is inside sells for more than the teardown costs. My honest read is that this is one of the thinnest, riskiest margins in all of heavy industry. A business where you pay to acquire your own raw material problem and pray the metal market holds. The tow nobody talks about. Before he can even start, there is a cost most people never think about: getting the ship to the yard. These carriers are often mothballed on one coast and scrapped on another, and a supercarrier is too wide to fit through the Panama Canal. So when the Independence was sold for scrap, it could not take the short route. It had to be towed, slowly, by tugboat, all the way from Washington State, down the entire west coast of the Americas, around the southern tip of South America, and back up to Texas. A journey of roughly 16,000 miles, taking months before a single piece of the ship could be cut. 16,000 miles to reach the yard where the real work would even begin. Picture that. Before you earn $1 from the steel, you first pay to drag a dead 60,000-ton warship most of the way around a continent. That tow alone is a small fortune, and it is pure cost, spent before the actual business even begins. And the penny was the easy part. Why nobody else wanted it? You might ask why these ships get scrapped at all. Why not save them? Every other option is worse, and people have tried them all. A museum sounds noble, and a handful of carriers have become them: the Intrepid, the Midway, the Yorktown. But a museum ship is a bottomless money pit, costing millions a year just to keep from rusting into the water, and there are only so many cities willing and able to fund one forever. The market for museum carriers is full. Sinking one as an artificial reef is possible, and the Oriskany was cleaned and sunk off Florida to become exactly that. But preparing a ship to be sunk cleanly is itself enormously expensive. Selling it to a foreign navy is a fantasy. These conventional supercarriers are obsolete, ruinously expensive to operate, and wrapped in security restrictions that make an export nearly impossible. So the options collapse down to one. When a museum cannot afford it, no navy wants it, and reefing costs too much, the only path left is the scrapper and his penny. Every road leads back to the shipbreaker. He is not the first choice. He is the last one standing. A carrier does not sell for 1 cent because it is worthless to history. It sells for 1 cent because every alternative to scrapping it costs even more than scrapping it. The steel price decides everything. Here is the trap that turns the scrapper's thin margin into a real gamble. He does not control the one number that decides his fate. A value of everything he pulls out of that ship is set by the global scrap metal market, and that market moves on its own, driven by construction demand, by economies on the far side of the world, by forces no shipbreaker can influence. When scrap prices are high, the mountain of steel inside a carrier is worth a great deal, and the penny deal turns into a solid profit. When scrap prices fall, the same steel is worth far less, while the tow, the labor, and the toxic cleanup cost exactly the same as before. A scrapper who took on a carrier in a strong market can win handsomely. A scrapper who bought into a project just before prices dropped can watch a year of brutal, hazardous work end in a loss on a ship he technically owns free and clear. The verdict. So can you make money taking a carrier off the Navy's hands for a penny? Yes, but only if you understand you are running a demolition project, not buying a treasure. In the good version, you are a well-equipped shipbreaker with a deep water yard, experienced crews, and the permits to handle hazardous material at scale. You take the carrier in a strong scrap market, run a tight teardown, sell the steel and the copper and the brass for well above your costs, and walk away with a real profit from a ship the Navy paid you, in effect, to remove. You turned a national liability into your raw material. In the bad version, the tow ran over budget. The asbestos removal took longer and cost more than you planned. The project dragged for years, and the scrap market sagged in the middle of it. Now you are holding 60,000 tons of a warship that is costing you more to dismantle than the metal will ever return. And there is no walking away, because the ship is legally, completely, and inescapably yours. Same carrier, same penny. What separates a profit from a disaster is entirely in the metal price and the discipline of the teardown, neither of which the penny on the contract tells you anything about. Next time you see a great gray warship, remember how the story usually ends. Not in battle, not in a museum, in a shipbreaking yard on the Gulf Coast. cut slowly into pieces by men in respirators. It's steel loaded onto trucks and sold by the ton. A machine that cost a nation billions, that carried a floating city of people, that projected power across oceans, closes its ledger at 1 cent. That final penny is not an insult, and it is not a bargain. It is just the truth about what any object is worth at the end, once the thing it was built to do is finished, and all that is left is the cost of making it disappear. A carrier's last mission is to be taken apart, and someone has to be paid, in steel, to carry it out.